Hey everybody, thanks for joining me here today. This is Nicole with Topaz. Today we are going to discuss mastering ReMask for our landscape photography. I'm going to be going over 3 or 4 different compositions, mainly focusing on replacing the background in our landscape images to get more unique backgrounds, more unique skies, and take out certain elements that might be boring or in the way. Alright, so let's go ahead and get right on into it. Alright, so I want to show you some before and afters as we get into it. And basically we've all been in the same situation. We've gone out to take images at a really beautiful location or something that you're really interested in, and the sky is just kind of boring, or it doesn't necessarily do what you want it to. So this is the original image. This is actually of a forest fire, but I thought it kind of looked like cloud coverage if it turned into a sunrise or sunset image. So I wanted to play around with that idea. And I was able to do that pretty easily using Topaz ReMask and then going and taking each of the layers into Lens Effects and Topaz Adjust to come up with this image. And we'll go over this workflow here in just a moment. Take a look at another image. This is using the same cloud as in the last one, but I wanted to show you all the different variances that you can really play around with in an image. This is the original image here. I took it into ReMask and took the actual layer a little bit into Adjust to bring out some detail and texture within the foreground. Then I just started playing with my clouds. Now I really liked this one for a more daytime shot, and then I thought, what if I want to again take it to more sunrise or sunset type of feel? So I took my foreground into Lens Effects to put on the sunset filter and then played around with different clouds. Here's the first one. The second one. It's fun to come in and just see what your image would look like. And this isn't necessarily something you would do for all of your landscape images, but when you're out and you're taking these shots and you see a really boring sky, don't let that deter you from continuing to take the shot, or don't get discouraged if you have gray skies, no clouds, nothing really dramatic going on, because you can always come in and use the tools that ReMask provides you later and get something very, very dramatic and creative. Here's where this image started. And after a little bit of work, able to get that. So those are the 3 images I think we're going to go over today. Let me see. We have, I believe, I can go into this one later. This I really go into the reflection in what you do in a situation where you have a reflection in your image that should be reflecting the sky. So we can go over that during the more advanced area. So let's go ahead and hop on into ReMask. I have a few questions coming in right now about the compatibility of ReMask. ReMask is only going to be compatible at this point with a program that has layers capabilities, such as Photoshop, Photoshop Elements, or Paint Shop Pro. If you have Aperture or Lightroom and you're using Topaz Labs through Fusion, if you don't have a layers program, you're not able to access Topaz ReMask. So that is something to be aware of whenever you're using ReMask. Let's go ahead and start off with this image first. And I'm actually just going to get rid of everything and start fresh. Okay, this is the original image, which is a nice composition. It's just a little boring. There's not a lot of really bright colors going on, so I definitely want to amp that up a little bit. In my sky, I feel like it could really be a little bit more dramatic, have some nicer clouds in there, so I thought this was a good one to start off with. So I'm just going to make a background copy and go directly into Topaz Labs, Topaz ReMask. The first thing we're going to do is make our mask. What we're going to be covering today is a basic intro to it, but we're going to skip over the basic pretty quickly. So if you are not really into the advanced portion of ReMask yet, we're going to be covering some of those steps today. And then if you want to look at a more basic introductory tutorial, there's another tutorial called Masking Made Easy, and you can check that out for a much more introductory course into ReMask. But let's go ahead and start with this particular image. As you can tell, if you're familiar with Topaz programs, this is something that the interface is a little bit different than the rest of our programs. This is the one that kind of strays away because it does a lot of different things with it. It's based on a tri-map technology, which tri-map means it's just 3 different colors. The 3 colors are green, red, and blue. The green is the keep color, the red is the cut color, and the blue is the compute color. When you bring an image into ReMask, you'll either have a green or red overlay on your image like this. I prefer green, and then you'll have a blue brush that's auto selected for you. So I just come in and I immediately just size my brush where I need it to be, and I start drawing over the area where I want my mask to be. So in this one, we're cutting out our sky. So I'm making a line with my blue brush along the horizon and along these trees, and anywhere that I see that there's blue coming through the trees, I'm just going to kind of cover with this blue brush, make sure that the program knows it needs to compute all of this area. So that's the very first simple step using ReMask. Then whenever you have the compute area selected, you can come to this fill bucket, especially easy when you're using skies. Just you come to this red fill bucket, which will, instead of having to paint something in, it just fills it in when you press that bucket on the area. So now we have our tri-map: green for keep, red for cut, blue for compute. Once you have your initial tri-map, what you have to do is just press this little compute mask to be able to really use the rest of these more advanced tools. So I'm just going to press compute mask, and it immediately gives me my mask. And this is a pretty good mask to start off with, considering it has all of these trees and not really straight edges or anything like that. It's done a pretty great job, but we definitely need to work on it just a little bit due to certain issues that you're going to run into when you're working on landscape images and skies. So what I'm going to do here is look at this in a different view. Over here on the top right, you have the ability to look at it within just one of the images. So this is the masking view. You can look at it over here on the left, your image, your tri-map, your mask, what you're keeping, and what you're cutting. Okay, so those are the 5 different views. And then you have different view modes. You can do a split screen, or you can do a 4 screen. And I like the 4 screen whenever I'm doing these presentations. So we'll do this, and I'll get onto my tri-map. So now we have 4 different views here. This is the tri-map, the mask, the keep area, which is something we're going to be keeping a look at, and then our initial image, or our original image. Okay, so with this initial compute, mask compute, you'll notice in our keep area, this is an important box to look at down here on the bottom right. It's pretty good, except you have this halo of blue just kind of as an outline to these trees in this area. I'll scroll in just a little bit more so that's more obvious for you to see over here. And the reason is that the original image over here on the left has that bright blue sky. So some of those pixels stayed attached when it did the compute. So that's one of the major things we're going to be covering today, is how to get rid of this halo and how to make it easier to blend in with a new background. So a couple more advanced brushes are the single color selection and the dual color selection. We'll be going over that in just one second. But first, these type of little areas over here that you see on the mask that are a little bit translucent, but it's a hard edge, this mountain here should be completely covered in. I would just go back to my basic brushes, and I'm going to go to my Keep Basic. You can paint on any 4 of these views at this point, so even if you painted on your original image, you'll notice that it affects this mask up here. So I'm just going to kind of fill that in a little bit. It automatically fills in if you just want to do a couple little selections with your keep. It's as simple as that to kind of get it full. And now we can work more on dealing with the blending and merging issue that you're going to run into when you try to replace a background. Okay, first we have the single color selection tool. The single color selection tool is great. It also has a keep and a cut. And what it does is it allows you to keep a certain color. It's based on color as opposed to edges, and the same thing with the cut. So if you have a blue sky like this that is pretty, it has some variations in color but not much, I would come to this single color selection red brush and work with that first before doing anything else, because it's the easiest one. And all I'm going to do is select this blue of the sky. I'm in this lower left view right now. Just selecting the blue of my sky, right next to the trees. And once I select that, you'll notice that a blue color swatch, the color that I chose, is now next to that red brush. And that's what I'm going to be erasing. And now all I have to do, I can go over the trees, I can do anything else. And look at that tri-map view above, the red, yellow, or red, green, and blue one. You'll notice that the very left, it has erased just the color that I chose. Now if I come and do the same thing, maybe about right here, it's going to go through that same pattern. So this is going to help eliminate some of the halos that are happening on your trees over here in the keep view. Now, sometimes you'll run into the fact that it doesn't eliminate. As you can see over here, there's still a blue halo, or it's getting a little bit better, but it's still there. And if you put a red sky behind it, it's going to be really, really obvious. So you need to take that into consideration as you're going through this masking process about that merging and blending part. Now, the one thing, we'll go into these other areas here shortly, but we'll just jump on down to these 4 sliders over here. Now, one thing to know about these 4 sliders is if you do not have a keep view available, here we're looking at our tri-map view, and here we're looking at our mask view, these bottom 2 sliders become grayed out because you need to look at your keep view to really see what these 2 sliders do. So let's just take a look at this keep view over here as I take my recovery slider up. The recovery slider is going to try to recover some of the original color of this area. See how it's blue right now? It's trying to take away that blue and make it the original foreground color. Sometimes this recovery slider does not do as much as you want it to do. And that is because this is the non-advanced mode of our recovery slider. This little checkbox, this high quality slow, is slow. That's why we've put it there. However, it is somewhat magical. So when you find you're in a situation where your background color is just not separating from your foreground image, that going into a high quality recovery mode is going to be really helpful for you. Now, it only is slow once. Now here's where my recovery was. I had all that blue. Okay, and now I'm going to take that all the way up. Just keep an eye over there. You see immediately it brought back those pixels as the foreground color and not necessarily as that blue color, which it was. So that is a really helpful thing when you're trying to merge 2 layers together like we're going to be doing here in a second. Now we have our desaturation slider, which is just going to be a little bit more helpful in getting some of those areas that just weren't able to quite get all the blue out of them. For example, up here in the very, very, very top left of this tree line, there's still a little bit of blue left over, and so it's going to just desaturate those edges and get that to go away. So those are some main tools for you to think of when you're taking away a sky. Now let's go ahead and go back to our 4 view. I'm going to go back to fit, and I'm just going to clean this up a tiny bit by going to my basic color brushes and just doing a little bit of cleaning. And I'm just going along the edges and it's just filling it in for me. It's pretty basic. Now if you need to undo a mark, I just did that actually. Let me scroll in and I'll show you. We do have undo redo buttons here for you to work with. You can also use Control or Command Z to undo. So just the standard undo tools are there for you to work with. Okay, we're pretty good here. I'm just going to clean up a couple more issues that I see on this keep view. You'll notice that in this gray area there's still a little bit of fogging going on, so I'm just cleaning that up a little bit. And I'm pretty happy, so I'm going to say okay and get back into Photoshop. Now you'll notice that we have a mask over here next to our layer. It was automatically created for us. And now we can begin the process of replacing the sky and then blending the sky and the foreground together. I'm going to stop here for just a moment and I'm going to look at the questions because I know that as I go, a lot of questions are being generated, and Stephanie, I think, is getting most of them answered, but just in case it applies to everybody, I'll take a look at them really quickly. Theodore asked a great question. He says, once you send the mask to Photoshop, can you go back to Topaz and readjust the mask? Yes, you can. If I take this back into ReMask right now, what it's going to do is have all of that information right here. The problem is it's taken a little bit, it crops some of that compute a little bit, so you're going to have to come in and work with it a little bit whenever you press that compute mask for the first time. So it'll be essentially the exact same thing, but you are going to have to make sure and just do little touch-ups here and there. Now, if you want a possibility of not doing a touch-up whatsoever, you can use it on a smart object, and then you can go right back into ReMask and all of your original lines are there. But I prefer this way personally because if I just go to filter again and get back into ReMask, it's always going to keep all of that information exactly where I wanted it, and I don't have to go through the whole process of everything all over again. But you will have to, whether it's a smart object or you go in just with that layer, press this compute mask again to restart the process, and then you'll have to just do a little bit of touch-ups, and then that's pretty much how simple that is. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the bringing a sky that's a little bit more interesting into the mix. So I have several different skies that have either come from iStock imagery, some taken on my own, and just various, I have just like a stockpile of different sky backgrounds. And I think it's a good thing as a photographer, especially a landscape photographer, who might not be able to always be there when the weather is exactly what you want it to be. If you want to create these dramatic landscapes, think about that and keep, when you have a great sky, but the rest of, maybe the actual subject isn't that great or it's not that great of lighting, but this gorgeous sky is occurring, keep that image for the sky itself because you might find that you want to use it in some sort of compilation down the road. So the first one I'm going to use for our image is this particular image of these nice wispy clouds, which not a great image to me, but the clouds have something to offer. So I'm just going to separate this and make two different windows. There are several different ways that you can bring another image layer into your layers palette. One of them is to go through the place, which is usually what I do. You can go up to File, then Place. You can find your background image. I'm just going to press this one for now and say Place. It'll be placed into your image. You size it however you would like, and then you can move it around in your layers palette and get it behind where you want and really work with it like that. You can also, if you have it open within your windows, like I do this one with the clouds here, you can also just drag and drop the layer. So I'm just dragging the layer of this image, that sky layer, and I'm just dragging it over to my landscape image. Just going to say okay there. Get rid of, put this one back up there. There we go. And now I have my sky image in there and I can work with it that way as well. So several different ways, whichever way you prefer is the way that you should work with it. The idea that we're going over today is more of how to naturally blend it and make it look like it belongs within that particular image. So I'm going to double click and make that stick. And so just that quickly I was able to go from this sky, replace it with this sky, and now I can take both of these in. If I want to amp it up a little bit, I can maybe do a stamp layer real quick and take it into adjust together. Maybe just do a quick photo pop, something along those lines, and be okay. And we've gone from this image here, our original, to this new sky image pretty quickly. Now these blended together pretty well together. I might go in and work with the blend just a little bit, but I want to go over a more dramatic blend as well. So let's go to our next image and work on that one. So this one we were able to start here and end with this very dramatic cloud formation behind these mountains. Really took the light to a different tonal range with a much warmer scale, and well, I'll show you right now how we did that. Let me just go ahead and get rid of all of these extra layers. One of the things with this image, kind of the problems that I initially saw when I thought about replacing the sky for this particular landscape shot, was this is smoke. And even if it's cloud or smoke, it is difficult to mask in any other program that I know to really get that translucency to stay there but not get the color of the background within this smoke itself. So that was one of the challenges I knew going into this that I was going to face within ReMask. So let's see how ReMask handles it. I know on one area of the smoke it does really well, which is actually just incredible, and then on another area we have to go in and work with it a little bit more. And because I can't really see the separation, I'm going to go to my image and actually make the outline on my image. And even though you're not seeing the tri-map that I'm creating right now, it is happening on my tri-map view. So let's take a look at that. So the line that I just made was being created, you just couldn't see it on the image view. Now I can come to my red fill bucket and take out my sky. And again, you have to press that compute mask for your initial mask. So this is our initial mask, and you can tell exactly where the smoke really is, the translucency is. It's over here on the right, here on the middle, and on the left. Let's take a look at our keep view. Okay, so our keep view and our original image is a good one to start off with. So we're still keeping a nice translucency here in the smoke area. You can see through it. It does look like smoke. Over here on the right, same idea. It does look pretty good. One thing that I want to make sure and do is work with this single color selection tool, because even though I don't see it really that well, it looks pretty good on my keep view. It does have quite a bit of blue still in those areas. So let's go to our 4 view and look at everything at the same time. So again, the single color selection brush is great when you're dealing with a sky, because you can just choose the cut brush and you can just take it, choose the color that you want to get rid of, and just go along the edges, and it will really start to just clear things up a little bit more. Now, if it takes off some areas that you don't want, especially when you're dealing with landscapes, your sky has a lot of color that it's reflecting onto your landscapes in the background, especially like far off distance mountains. The mountains start to take on the color of the sky and the color of the light. So you might run into a problem where you take off some of that color like we did here in the mountainous area. You can tell through this mask right here that it's translucent. I would just come to my basic brush, just do a couple clicks, and it just cleans it right on up. Pretty simple. Okay, I'm just going to do a little bit more cleaning along the edges. Everything's looking pretty good. Do one more single color selection, getting rid of some of that stuff around the smoke to make it a little bit more translucent on those edges. Come over here to the right and do the same thing. Okay, now I feel like we're getting somewhere, so that's good. I am going to use the recovery slider. Even though I don't see a ton of color coming through, I did want to make sure to use that. I don't think we need the high quality this round, but take a look at this keep as I take my recovery, even though it's not the high quality, as I take that up. So here, over here, you see it's a little bit rough on my mask area. The color is coming from that background a little bit. It's a little bit of a halo, not much. And if I take my recovery slider up, it just really nicely smooths that out, and it's going to make it much more easier to put another background in there. I am going to desaturate, especially with my smoke here. You can tell if you take a look at this one little puff of smoke through the 2 mountains. I'm going to take my desaturation back to 0, and now I'm going to take that up to 100. And you can tell it just desaturates the edges and it's going to allow for that blending to be a much more natural blend. So you could take a little bit more time and clean up the edges here. I'm not really going to worry. I think we're pretty good. And I'm just going to say okay and get back into Photoshop. So here we have our mask attached to our new layer. Now I can easily bring in any other image. Now I wanted to bring in this guy. These clouds are just amazingly dramatic. Love them. And I thought they would really fit in with the smoke that was starting to happen in that landscape image. So I'm just going to go through that same process of just separating the window, getting back to my image that I want to be working on. Here we are. And I'm just going to drag and drop this image in there and get rid of this guy. Have him go back up there. All right, so now we have our sky and our background. Going to press Control-T to be able to highlight that layer and be able to adjust it where I want it to go. I'm going to double click to make it stick, and I'm going to take this layer down below my masked layer. All right, so we have our background layer below the masked image to replace that sky, and it definitely does not look right or natural at this point. So that's what we're going to work on over the next few steps here. So the first thing you want to do is kind of work on the composition of your sky, putting the two images together. What really looks best? I'm going to try to get rid of these lower clouds here, this lower portion, because I really don't feel like that goes very well. And just kind of maneuver this background around until I feel like it really starts to work with my foreground image. So that to me is starting to look much better than it was just a second ago. So I'm happy there. But now obviously we have the distinctive color differences going on with these two. So I wanted to make this image more of a sunset image going on, very dramatic clouds. So what I'm going to need to do at this point is making a copy of my masked layer, and I'm going to take that top one into a program or any type of adjustments you can do within Photoshop or any host program that you're working in. You can do some sort of adjustment. I'm going to be using lens effects because I find it's very easy, and I know that there's a single tone filter in here. We're not going to spend any time in here, but it'll give you an idea of how quick you can do something like this. This is a single tone filter effect, and I'm just going to go to my sunset filter. And immediately I start to have a sunset-y type of feel. Here's before, here's after to my image. And I can already tell that these clouds or the smoke is starting to take on the same tonal scale as the clouds are. I do want to add a little bit of other tone of my own, so I'm just going to come over here into my color tone adjustments and put a little bit more red in there, a little bit more magenta, maybe even a little bit of blue. Okay, so here's before, here's after. It's pretty dramatic here, so I'm going to say okay and see what it looks like. All right, so much better. All right, so here was, let's see here, before. And then we quickly matched it to get that same tone for the smoke to the clouds. Now, to me, overall, this looks just too pink and too much, so I want to tone that down, and I want to go into a program and take the entire composition and work on it now as an image as opposed to several different layers. So I'm just going to make a stamp layer. The way that I do that is press my Alt key down, then go to my Layers palette, scroll down to Merge Visible, all while holding my Alt key down, unclicking Merge Visible, and then I have a stamp layer where it took a picture of all the different layers below and it made one layer without actually flattening my file, so I can go and track back if I want. I really like that feature. So now I'm just going to hop on into, let's say, Adjust 5, maybe go to a toned area. Actually, that one looks pretty good. Here's before, here's after. I think that was one of the colored seleniums to start off with, and then worked from there. But you get the idea. You can come in here and continue to work on it and still get those really extremely powerful clouds without getting it to be so pink and everything being so sunsetty. So Let's take my transparency slider and bring back some of that color. Tone can go. I'm just working with this real quick just to show you how quick it can be. I'm just going to add a few more details into my detail boost and detail strength to get my foreground to really pop with detail. I'm going to take out a little bit of noise because my sky is getting a little noisy with all of these changes I'm making to this image, and I'm just going to press OK. And it's easy. Once you get the process of going through these different steps and knowing that you first have to go into ReMask and really get a clean mask that will allow you to easily blend and merge with your background. That's not going to have a really significant halo happening which makes it obvious that it's two separate layers. You just have to work really hard at that masking part at the beginning and just to perfect it, and then you can play around with the different backgrounds and work with it from there. Let's see one more image here. Actually, I'm going to turn this over to you guys. I'm going to extend the Q&A portion of this session a little bit longer because I have a ton of questions coming through, and I want to make sure and answer as many as I can. Let's see here. Valerie asks, what does the saturation slider do? It's actually the desaturation slider, Valerie. Just let me show you real quick to show you exactly what it does. Let me just, okay, so let's do this. That's computing my mask. Okay, so great initial mask to start off with. At least that's what it looks like from the mask view. When you're working with trees like this, always be sure to look at your image in the keep view so you can start to see what's actually being kept. Now, when you look at it in the keep view, you can start to see that this mask, which looks great over here, has a halo around the trees here. And that's because our original image has this white background, so it's keeping some of those white pixels. The desaturation slider is going to desaturate those white pixels into just mute gray pixels. So you can start to see it like that. Here's again before and after. And you can just start to see it becomes all these gray. Now there's still a little bit of this, you're seeing a lot more of this kind of gray ghosting than at least I would want. So that's when I would come in with my foreground color, the high quality recovery slider, and I would definitely go to high quality right away and take this up. But that's so much better. Look what just happened. So here's without the recovery, and here's with the recovery. So I've recovered a lot of those initial branches, all the branches that were kind of taken out, and I have a really good mask that took seconds on trees like this, which is great. But that is what the desaturation does, Valerie. Robert, great, and Vince, and anybody else who's asked it. The color range slider, such an amazing tool. Let me get out of this particular, I'm just going to say okay for this mask. And we'll go in and do some sky replacements if you'd like with this one here in a bit. But to show the color range, this would actually be a great one. Let's take this original background in one more time. Okay, so I'm just going to make that same quick blue compute brush stroke. And quickly just fill in my sky. To cut that, press compute mask, and I have my initial mask. Now I can come in and fill this in real quick. Nothing too strong. There we go. But let's look at the color range slider. I'm going to go to my try map and to my keep. Okay, let me just do a couple cleaning up so you can see. Now here we have again the issue that we had before with that blue sky coming through, or that blue sky coming in. Whenever you're doing your single color selection, cut or keep, so let's say I want to cut my sky, so I'm just going to come right next to my tree line, and I have that color, and now I'm going to go along my tree line. You'll notice that it only took this portion of the sky, even though I have that blue color and the majority of the sky is that color, at least somewhat like that color, but it's not. It's not the exact same color. And the color range slider is the slider that allows the sensitivity of the color to occur. So I'm going to say Control Z and get that stroke back in, and I'm going to go through the same process. I'm going to cut out my sky, and I'm just going to come and grab with the little eyedropper the color blue, and you see the color blue swatch is the same, but now I'm going to take my color range slider up to 50, and now I'm going to make that same stroke, and you'll see it took away a heck of a lot more than just when the color range was at 10. It's either good when you have these kind of big gradients like this sky where you can see the benefit of having the color range set high. The color range set really low is great if you're trying to mask something with very similar colors, and whenever you are, going to your basic cut brush, it's cutting everything and it's not just cutting the part that you want. So you can come in here, take your color range slider down to about 1 or 2 or 3, and it's going to be a very specific color range that it will take. Okay, Craig would like for me to go over the reflection in the water after adding clouds, and I'm happy to do that. It's a little bit more complicated of a process, so this is going to be the more advanced portion, but it's really not, there's just more steps. It's not necessarily more complicated. So let's look at this image. This cloud, I was not trying at that point to make it exactly how it needed to be. I was just playing with the idea of the reflection. So this doesn't look exactly the way you want it to be, but it works for now. Instead of going through the whole remasking process, let me just show you the mask that I did make initially. Here's the original image. And what I did is I took this into Remask, and I not only cut out the sky, but I also cut out the portion of the water reflection that didn't have anything where the sky should be coming through. So same area that the sky is coming through on my original image. And so that is how I got this particular cutout. So once I had this particular cutout, I was free to come in and work with the sky replacement. So here's where we would be just if we went into Remask and we had just come back into Photoshop. And now we have this masked layer, and we've masked out the water and the sky. So let's bring in maybe we'll bring in this one instead. Okay, so I'm going to just drag and drop this over here, put this back in my area, come back. Okay, so now I have this image, this sky image, in my layers palette, and I'm just going to work on it just for the sky portion. I'm not going to worry about the fact that you can now see through my cutout into the background layer area. I'm not going to worry about that yet. I'm just going to put my sky into my image like so, and then worry about it. Now that I have my sky in there, I can then come to my layer, my sky layer, that new background, and I can put a layer mask on there. And I'm just going to come down to my layer mask icon, click on that, get a nice white reveal all icon, and then come to my paintbrush and just paint on my mask on that bottom portion to paint back in that original image. So now I've painted back in the original background. I've just actually painted out the bottom portion of my sky image. So only thing that's coming through is this top portion of the sky. So that's how you are going about not putting it into the reflection when you first come in. And then all I do is I make a copy of my background that I'm replacing with. And I'm going to take this actual layer, this new layer that I have, and I'm going to invert it. And I'm just going to go to Transform under Edit and say Flip Vertical. Okay, when I flip vertical, my layer then also, or my layer mask then goes with that as well. So that's good. And now I have as you can see over here in my layers palette, these two are facing each other now, like in a reflection. Same thing with the layer masks. So now I have just my sky coming through in my water portion. So then you just place that to where it looks correct, where everything starts to kind of make sense. So maybe maybe right about there, that'll work. Now I have to worry about how to make it look a little bit more natural, especially with the difference between the reflection of the mountains and the reflection of the sky. They look very different. And the way that I work with that is with the blending modes in my layers palette. So I'll just take this particular one that's supposed to be reflecting in the water and actually make that mode more of an overlay or a soft light to make it make more sense. So that is how I would work with that. I hope that makes sense. And again, a little bit more information thrown at you than you might want. So sorry if that confused anybody, but hopefully that helps some people with their reflections, because you definitely, when you're working with landscape images, and a lot of really gorgeous dramatic landscapes might have some reflections in them, you want to think about those reflections, because those too will need to be realistic if you're trying to create a realistic composition. Okay, Carol would like for me to discuss the dual colors, and yes, I did not go over those. Dual colors are essentially the exact same thing as the single color selection. Let's take this one in again. Hop on into ReMask, except when you're using your dual color selection, you're not only getting your foreground keep, but you're also at the exact same time getting your foreground cut or your background cut. So when you click on your dual color selection, actually before I do that, I have to make a basic mask. That's always the first step, is the basic thing. It's easy if you just make a basic one first, like this. You can even make it sloppy. It doesn't have to be perfect, because you can always go back in the next area and then make it, really make it better. Say compute mask. Okay, here's my initial selection, my initial mask, which is awesome for an initial mask. But let's take a look at our tri-map view and this mask view. All right, so even though this looks pretty good, it could be better. It could be much better. So one way to work with screens such as veils or trees or anything where you have a color in the background mixed with your foreground color, and it's really hard to get in there and actually mask it out like it would be here. It's very difficult to get in here and really just make this perfect. So this is what the dual color selection brush is. You just press dual color selection. The first thing that'll come up is the green eyedropper. So you put the green eyedropper in an area that you want to keep. So I'm going to click on a part of my tree, and you'll notice that my little color swatch just changed to this brown color. Then automatically your eyedrop turns into a red cut eyedrop, and you just select the cut color that you want. And I'm just going to select a portion of the sky through the trees. So now I have my two colors, and I'm just going to take my brush size up and go along my entire tree. As I do this, you'll notice that some of these colors are turning to green and some are turning to red. Some are staying blue. As I make that, what happened over here was that all of these little twigs that you really weren't able to see very well started to be able to be seen. And it just makes it a cleaner, a better cutout. And that is how the dual color selection brush works. And that's something that is really great, again, for veils and trees within your landscapes. Ron asks, when would you adjust the mask hardness and strength? Ron, great question. A mask hardness and strength within ReMask are going to make your mask a stronger, more strong-edged mask. That is something you're going to want to avoid when you're making these compositions that you want to naturally merge together and have them blend together. You want softer edges. You do not want super hard edges, because it makes it really difficult. So, for example, we'll just take this guy in again, and we'll take in this original. Let's look at the mask view and the keep view so we can see him a little bit better. The mask hardness is going to, again, you can see as I move this, it moves how hard the lines are on my mask. The mask strength is going to bring it right out to the very edges and really try to get as much information as it can within that mask. So it kind of just builds up those pixels, and instead of having any translucency, it's just a very strong, solid mask. When your strength is down, you start to get a little bit more of that translucency that's going to be more natural when trying to blend two images like this together. Same thing with the mask hardness. The less that your mask is hard, the easier it will to be working with this recovery and desaturation. So you can put a background behind these trees and have it look like it belongs there and not like a cutout of trees. So that is where the mask hardness and strength comes in to play within landscape imagery. If you are, for example, if you have an architecture image that does have really hard lines, or if you're working with a vectorized image that does have really hard lines and you want a very strong, hard mask, then that is when you would take advantage of those two sliders. But I don't have use for them, at least in my workflow, for my landscape imagery. When I'm replacing skies, I try to stay away from those two. Ray has a great question. He says, what about the magic brush? When you're in here, we have this thing called Topaz Magic Brush, and this occurs immediately after you do your first initial compute. Without the Topaz Magic Brush, your basic brushes, everything is just normal and nothing will really compute anymore, or auto compute, I guess you could say. So for example, if I take my red, work with my red and try to come in, you're not seeing anything happen over here on the mask. Whereas if I was using my Topaz Magic Brush, and there we go, it does its own little computation each time, and it works on the mask a little bit more each time. And that's what it means by Magic Brush. It really just allows you to continue working as you go, as opposed to having kind of a dead brush or just a normal brush. It's a computational brush. And so I always have that checked. I don't ever have that unchecked. Gary says, does the brush size make a difference? Gary, it does not. The only difference that it makes, I mean, it does, I guess I should say. Let's take this image back into ReMask. The main difference, the major difference it's going to be is if you use a large brush like this to make your initial compute stroke, you'll end up with a less than exact thing. It still does a really good job detecting everything, but you'll have to go back through and at this point really go in and make everything look a little bit better with your other brushes. So there will be some needed advanced tool action there. Now if I cancel out and go back in and do it with a smaller brush, you'll see that it's much more exact the first time around, and you don't have to necessarily worry about doing, making these, going back and doing all these different advanced tools, because the smaller your brushes, the more exact it's going to be, and the less work you're going to have to do later. So it just depends on what your workflow, whether you'd rather go back in and use the advanced tools or whether you'd like to have a pretty clean mask to start off with. I prefer to just use kind of a medium-sized brush and see what happens. I was just asked, what does the reset green, blue, or red at bottom do? This is to set, so let's say your default, whenever you open ReMask, your default look is this, and then you have your blue brush by default selected to go over it. Well, you don't have to have it that way. You can have it where your red, your cut color, is actually overlaid on your image by default, and your blue brush is selected by default, or you could have it as your blue as default. So it really is up to you. This is actually, blue would be a great choice if you're working with maybe an image that has tons of different elements in it, and you have a background through all of those different elements. You have a ton of different negative space. So let's say you have an up-close picture of a tree where you have 100 different areas that have your background color in it that you're trying to get out. Well, you don't want to start with keeping everything and then sitting there and going over 100 different spots with this blue brush. You're going to want to take this blue and overlay the blue, and at that point just take a couple strokes here. I'm just kind of showing you how this works. and then a couple strokes with your red. Let's see what that does. It's going to give you a somewhat good cutout, so you can start that way and then you can come in and work with your brush from there. So that's what the reset button is. Yes, you can press spacebar, Vlad, like I'm doing right now. My pointer will turn into a hand and I'm able to pan the image using spacebar and then the hand. So yes, you are able to do that. Katie says horse mane close to color and background. Little hairs to keep really giving me a fit. Suggestions, use desaturation or hardness. I would not use hardness, because what's going to happen is as you use hardness, Katie, you will keep all of those background colors. It'll harden and make those edges really strong as opposed to making them more translucent. If your hair is too close, if the mane is too close to the background, it will be very difficult to get it, but I would try using my the single color selection cut and keep, taking the color range down to a very, very low range, so it's eliminating the next color over and only keeping the color you want. And then I'd also work with my recovery at the high quality, and then maybe a little bit of the desaturation if you're carrying over some of that background color. But those are probably the 3 or 4 different tools I would look into. Elliot says, when do the desaturation and recovery sliders appear on the control panel? Sometimes they're there and sometimes they're not. They are only there, Elliot. All 4 are not there until you do your initial compute. Once you do your initial compute, after that very first try map, they will show up. Then the foreground color sliders will only show up if you are looking at a keep view in one of your views. So here we're looking at the image view and the try map view, so the foreground color sliders are actually grayed out. This is because you cannot see what these are doing unless you are looking at the keep view, so we don't want somebody to come in and start moving these around and thinking that it's helping their image when it might not be, and then they're not looking at the right view to see what it's actually doing. So that's why those are grayed out when you're not in the keep view. But they are always there after the initial compute. Thanks again, everybody, and have a wonderful afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are, and I will be talking to you soon. Bye-bye.